There's a difference between being seen and being known. Many people spend their lives trying to be seen, seeking approval, chasing attention, adjusting themselves to fit expectations that were never meant for them. But a true woman, she chooses a different path. She doesn't follow the noise. She doesn't run after acceptance. Because she understands something deeper, something most people overlook. Attraction doesn't come from chasing. It comes from alignment. When a woman knows who she is, she stops asking for permission to exist. She stops shrinking to make others comfortable. And in that moment, something shifts. Not around her, but within her. Because the world doesn't respond to who you pretend to be. It responds to who you truly are. And that's where her power lives. She doesn't wake up thinking, how do I get them to like me? She wakes up asking, am I living in alignment with what I believe? That's a different kind of question. And it leads to a different kind of life. You see, people are drawn to certainty, not perfection, certainty. The kind of certainty that doesn't need to announce itself, the kind that shows up in how she walks, how she speaks, how she chooses what she tolerates and what she doesn't, because every boundary she sets sends a message. This is who I am, and this is what I stand for. And here's the truth. When you stand for something, you don't need to chase anything. The right people feel it. The right opportunities find it. The right energy matches it. That's attraction, not manipulation, not performance, not pretending, just alignment. And alignment requires courage because it's easier to follow. It's easier to blend in. It's easier to say yes when everything inside you is saying no. But a true woman understands that every time she abandons herself to be accepted, she moves further away from the life she actually wants. So she chooses differently. She chooses growth over comfort. She chooses truth over approval. She chooses self-respect over temporary validation. And in doing so, she becomes magnetic. Not because she tries to be, but because she is. People can feel authenticity. It's rare. And rare things are valuable. That's why she doesn't need to compete. She doesn't need to prove. She doesn't need to follow because she's not here to fit into the world. She's here to stand in her truth so fully that the world adjusts around her. And when that happens, she doesn't chase, she doesn't force, she doesn't follow, she attracts. There comes a moment in life when you realize that approval is a moving target. No matter how much you adjust, no matter how much you give, no matter how perfectly you perform, someone will still expect more. And if your life is built on chasing that approval, you'll spend your days running in circles, never actually arriving anywhere that feels like you. Identity changes that, because identity is not something you negotiate with the world, it's something you decide within yourself. When you know who you are, you stop asking for permission to be it. You stop filtering your thoughts to fit someone else's expectations. You stop measuring your worth based on reactions, applause, or silence. Instead, you begin to operate from a place that is steady, grounded, and deeply rooted in something that cannot be taken away. Most people misunderstand confidence. They think it's loud. They think it demands attention. But real confidence is quiet. It doesn't need to prove anything because it already knows. And that knowing comes from identity. The problem is many people never take the time to build it. They inherit labels, they absorb opinions, they become what the environment rewards. And over time, they lose sight of who they actually are beneath all of that noise. So they keep seeking approval, hoping it will fill the gap. But approval doesn't create identity, it replaces it. And anything that replaces your identity will eventually control you. That's why the shift matters. The shift from asking, do they like me, to asking, do I like who I am becoming? Because one question gives your power away. The other brings it back. When you start building your life around identity, your decisions change. You don't choose what's popular, you choose what's aligned. You don't say yes out of fear, you say yes out of clarity. And more importantly, you learn to say no without guilt, because you understand that every no protects something that matters. That's what boundaries really are. They're not walls to keep people out. They're standards that keep you in alignment with yourself. And alignment is where strength comes from. You begin to notice that you don't need to convince people anymore. You don't need to explain every choice. You don't need to shrink your voice to make it more acceptable. Because the right people don't require you to become someone else. They recognize you for who you already are. But this path isn't easy. Choosing identity over approval means you will be misunderstood at times. It means not everyone will agree with you. It means walking away from spaces where you no longer belong. And that can feel uncomfortable, but discomfort is not a sign you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it's a sign you're finally doing something right. Because growth and approval rarely exist in the same space. When you grow, you change. And when you change, you disrupt expectations. People who were comfortable with the old version of you may not understand the new one. And that's okay. Your job is not to stay the same so others can stay comfortable. Your job is to become who you were meant to be. And that requires you to expand your identity, not limit it, to expand your standards, to expand your mindset, to expand your sense of what's possible. But don't shrink it to fit approval. Don't dilute your voice to make it easier to accept. Don't trade your truth for temporary validation. Because the moment you do, you might gain approval, but you lose yourself. And nothing is worth that. So build something stronger than approval. Build identity that doesn't depend on applause. Build clarity that doesn't disappear under pressure. Build self-respect that doesn't negotiate with doubt. Because when identity is strong, approval becomes irrelevant. And when approval becomes irrelevant, you become unstoppable. Not because the world agrees with you, but because you finally agree with yourself. There's something you can't always see, but you can always feel. It walks into a room before a word is spoken. It shapes how people respond without a single explanation. It determines whether opportunities move toward you or pass you by. That something is energy. Not the kind you talk about casually, but the kind you live every single day. The kind that comes from how you think, how you carry yourself, and what you believe about who you are. Because attraction is not about what you say, it's about what you transmit. Most people believe attraction is about effort. They think if they try harder, say the right things, or present themselves perfectly, they will pull the right things into their lives. But effort without alignment creates tension. And tension pushes things away. Alignment, on the other hand, creates ease. When your thoughts, your actions, and your identity are all moving in the same direction, you don't have to force anything. There's a natural flow to how you show up. There's a quiet confidence in how you move. And people feel that, even if they can't explain it. That's the energy of attraction. It doesn't beg, it doesn't chase, it doesn't convince. It simply exists. And because it exists, it draws. Think about the people you naturally gravitate toward. It's rarely because they tried to impress you. It's because they were grounded, certain, clear. There was something about them that felt real. That's what people respond to. Not perfection, but authenticity. And authenticity is impossible when you're constantly adjusting yourself to match expectations. Every time you filter who you are to be accepted, you weaken your energy. You create a version of yourself that feels forced, and people can sense that distance even if they don't know why. So the question isn't, how do I attract more? The real question is, what kind of energy am I putting into the world? Because energy is not neutral. It either invites or repels. When you operate from doubt, you send uncertainty. When you operate from insecurity, you send hesitation. And when you operate from clarity, you send direction, and direction is powerful. People trust direction. Opportunities follow direction, life responds to direction, but direction only comes when you decide who you are and commit to showing up as that person consistently. That's where expansion begins. You expand your awareness. You become more intentional about your thoughts. You notice what drains you and what fuels you. You pay attention to the environments you step into and the people you allow close to you, because energy is influenced by everything around you. And if you're not careful, you'll absorb more than you realize. That's why protecting your energy is not selfish. It's necessary. It means choosing conversations that add value, not noise. It means creating space for growth instead of staying in comfort. It means stepping away from anything that forces you to become less than who you are. But expansion also requires responsibility. You can't expect to attract clarity if you live in confusion. You can't expect to attract respect if you tolerate disrespect. You can't expect to attract strength if you avoid growth. What you seek is directly connected to what you embody, and that's the part most people overlook. They focus on outcomes instead of origins. They chase results instead of building the foundation that produces them. But the truth is simple. You don't attract what you want, you attract what you are. So if you want something different, you don't start by reaching outward, you start by building inward. You refine your mindset, you strengthen your identity, you align your actions with your values, and over time, something shifts. You stop forcing connections. You stop chasing opportunities. You stop needing validation to feel complete, because your energy begins to speak for you. And when it does, the right things don't need to be pursued. They recognize you. Attention is loud. It flashes. It pulls. It demands to be seen. It rewards what is immediate, what is visible, what can be consumed quickly. And in a world built around constant noise, it's easy to believe that attention is the goal, that if people are watching, if people are reacting, if people are engaging, then you must be moving in the right direction. But attention is not the same as meaning, and a life built only on attention will always feel empty once the noise fades. Purpose is different. Purpose is quiet. It doesn't rush to be noticed. It doesn't depend on applause to validate its existence. It moves with intention, not urgency. And while attention seeks the spotlight, purpose builds something that lasts long after the spotlight moves on. The challenge is that attention is immediate, while purpose requires patience. You can get attention quickly by saying what people want to hear, by following trends, by shaping yourself into something that fits the moment. But purpose asks more from you. It asks you to pause, to reflect, to decide what actually matters before you decide how you will be seen. And most people skip that step. They start with, how do I get noticed, instead of, why does this matter? Because asking why forces clarity. It forces you to confront whether what you're doing has depth or just surface level appeal. When you lead with purpose, your decisions change. You don't chase every opportunity. You choose the ones that align. You don't say yes to everything. You say yes to what moves you forward. You don't measure success by visibility. You measure it by impact. That's a different standard. And it's a harder one to follow because it doesn't always bring immediate results. There are moments when no one is watching. There are moments when your work goes unnoticed. There are moments when it feels like the world is moving faster than you are, but purpose isn't about speed, it's about direction, and direction determines where you end up, not how quickly you get there. When you operate with purpose, you build something steady, something that doesn't collapse when attention shifts, something that continues to grow even when the spotlight disappears, because it was never built for attention in the first place. It was built for meaning. That's why expansion matters. You expand your vision beyond short-term validation. You begin to see the bigger picture, the long game. You understand that what you're building today is shaping what you'll become tomorrow, and that changes how you show up. You become more intentional with your time. You become more selective with your energy. You become more focused on what truly matters, because you realize that attention can be taken away, but purpose cannot. It stays with you, guiding your decisions even when everything around you feels uncertain. But here's the truth most people avoid. Purpose requires sacrifice. It requires letting go of distractions that feel good in the moment but don't serve your long-term direction. It requires walking away from opportunities that offer attention but lack meaning. It requires discipline to stay committed when results are slow. And that's why many people drift back to attention. Because it's easier to follow what's trending than to build what's meaningful. It's easier to react than to create. It's easier to seek approval than to stand for something that not everyone will understand. But easy doesn't lead to fulfillment. Only purpose does. Because when your actions are rooted in purpose, they carry weight. They create impact. They resonate with people on a deeper level, not because they are loud, but because they are real, and real things last. So expand your focus. Build with intention, not for applause. Move with clarity, not for recognition. Create with depth, not for visibility. Because attention might bring you a moment, but purpose builds a life. Value is not something you announce. It's something you demonstrate, consistently, quietly, and without negotiation. And one of the clearest ways you demonstrate value is through boundaries. Not the kind that push people away, but the kind that define where you stand. The kind that make it clear what you accept, what you reject, and what you refuse to compromise on. Because without boundaries, value becomes invisible. If everything is allowed, nothing is respected. Most people struggle with this. They think boundaries are about conflict. They think saying no will create distance. They worry that if they stop accommodating, they will lose connection. But the opposite is often true. When you have no boundaries, you don't build stronger relationships, you build unclear ones. You create expectations that are unsustainable. You allow behaviors that slowly erode respect. And over time, you begin to feel it, not always immediately, but gradually, in the way your energy drains, in the way your voice becomes quieter, in the way you start choosing comfort over truth. Because every time you ignore a boundary, you send a message. Not just to others, but to yourself. You say, this is acceptable, even when it isn't. And over time, that message shapes your reality. That's why boundaries matter. They are not about controlling others. They are about clarifying yourself. When you set a boundary, you're not telling someone how to behave. You're showing them how you will respond. You're making a decision about what aligns with you and what doesn't, and that decision builds value. Because value is not created by how much you give. It's created by how well you protect what matters. Think about it. If your time is always available, it loses meaning. If your energy is always accessible, it loses impact. If your standards are always flexible, they lose strength. But when you begin to define limits, something changes. People start to understand that your presence is not guaranteed, it's earned, your time is not unlimited, it's intentional. Your energy is not something to be taken lightly, it's something to be respected, and respect is where value grows. But setting boundaries requires expansion. You have to expand your self-awareness. You have to recognize where you've been overextending, where you've been saying yes out of obligation instead of intention. You have to see clearly what is draining you and what is strengthening you, because not everything deserves access to you, and not everyone will understand that at first. There will be moments when people question your boundaries. There will be moments when they push against them. There will be moments when they expect you to return to the version of yourself that was easier to manage. But growth changes expectations. And when you grow, your boundaries must grow with you. That's where strength comes in. Because boundaries are not just about saying no. They're about standing firm in that no, even when it feels uncomfortable, even when it would be easier to give in, even when you know it might disappoint someone, because protecting your value will sometimes require you to disappoint others. And that's a difficult truth, but consider the alternative. If you avoid disappointing others, you will constantly disappoint yourself, and over time, that creates a gap between who you are and how you're living. Boundaries close that gap. They bring your actions back into alignment with your values. They create consistency between what you believe and how you behave, and that consistency builds trust, not just with others, but within yourself. And self-trust is powerful, because when you trust yourself, you move differently, you speak differently, you choose differently. You stop second-guessing your decisions. You stop seeking approval for every choice. You stop compromising on things that matter just to keep the peace, because you understand that peace built on compromise is not real peace. Real peace comes from alignment. So expand your standards. Protect your time with intention. Protect your energy with clarity. Protect your values with strength, because boundaries are not limitations. They are definitions, and what you define determines your value. In a world that rewards noise, it's easy to believe that power must be loud, that strength needs to be seen, announced, and constantly proven, that if you're not speaking the most, showing the most, or asserting the most, you're somehow falling behind. But real strength doesn't work that way. Real strength doesn't rush to be noticed. It doesn't depend on volume to create impact, and it doesn't need constant validation to confirm its presence. Because real strength is quiet. It shows up in consistency, not intensity. It shows up in discipline, not display. It shows up in the choices you make when no one is watching, and that's why it wins. Most people are focused on the moment. They chase quick recognition, immediate results, visible success. They want to feel powerful now, even if it costs them later. So they push harder, speak louder, and try to control outcomes that were never meant to be forced. But quiet strength plays a different game. It understands that power is not about proving. It's about becoming more grounded, becoming more focused, becoming more aligned with who you truly are. And becoming takes time. That's where patience enters the picture. Not passive waiting, but active commitment. The kind of patience that keeps you moving forward even when progress feels slow. The kind that allows you to build something solid instead of something temporary. Because anything built on noise will eventually collapse when the noise fades. But something built on quiet strength holds. It holds under pressure. It holds in uncertainty. It holds when everything around it begins to shift. That's the difference. Quiet strength doesn't react. It responds. When challenges come, it doesn't panic. It pauses. It observes. It chooses the next step with intention instead of impulse. And that ability to stay centered even when things feel chaotic creates an advantage most people overlook. Because while others are distracted by urgency, quiet strength is focused on direction. And direction always outperforms urgency in the long run. But this kind of strength requires expansion. You have to expand your mindset beyond immediate gratification. You have to let go of the need to constantly prove your worth. You have to trust that the work you're doing, even when it's unseen, is building something meaningful. That's not easy. There will be moments when silence feels like invisibility, moments when your progress isn't recognized, moments when it seems like others are moving ahead faster because they're louder, more visible, more aggressive. But speed is not always progress, and visibility is not always value. Quiet strength understands that depth matters more than display. So instead of competing for attention, it focuses on growth. Instead of reacting to every distraction, it stays committed to what truly matters. Instead of seeking approval, it builds self-trust, one decision at a time. And self-trust changes everything. Because when you trust yourself, you don't need to rush. You don't need to force outcomes. You don't need to prove your value in every room you enter. You simply show up as who you are and let your actions speak over time. That's where influence comes from, not from what you say once, but from what you do consistently. People begin to notice, not because you demanded attention, but because your presence carries weight. Your decisions carry clarity, your actions carry intention. And over time, that consistency builds credibility, and credibility builds respect. But respect earned through quiet strength is different. It's not based on fear, it's not based on pressure. It's based on trust. Because people know that what you show is real, that what you commit to, you follow through on, that what you stand for doesn't change depending on the situation. And that kind of reliability is rare. That's why it wins. So expand your focus. Let go of the need to be loud. Let go of the pressure to prove. Let go of the distractions that pull you away from your path. And instead, build something deeper. Build discipline that doesn't break under pressure. Build patience that doesn't fade in uncertainty. Build clarity that guides you when everything else feels unclear. Because quiet strength may not always be seen immediately. But in the end, it is always felt. There's a moment in every person's life when staying the same becomes more uncomfortable than changing. It doesn't happen all at once. It builds slowly, in the thoughts you can't ignore, in the habits that no longer serve you, in the quiet realization that where you are is not where you're meant to stay. And that's where growth begins, not as a choice, but as a necessity. Most people treat growth like an option, something they'll get to when it's convenient, when the timing is right, when the pressure fades. But growth doesn't wait for comfort. It demands movement, even when everything in you wants to stay where it feels familiar, because familiarity is not the same as alignment. You can be comfortable and still feel stuck. You can be safe and still feel unfulfilled. You can be accepted and still feel disconnected from who you truly are. That's the tension, and that tension is a signal that something within you is ready to expand, but expansion requires letting go. Letting go of old patterns that once protected you but now limit you. Letting go of identities that were built on past versions of yourself. Letting go of environments that no longer challenge you to become more. And that's not easy, because growth will ask you to walk into uncertainty. It will ask you to make decisions without guarantees. It will ask you to trust yourself before you feel ready. And most people resist that. They wait for clarity before they act. They wait for confidence before they move. They wait for certainty before they commit. But growth doesn't work that way. Clarity comes from action. Confidence comes from repetition. Certainty comes from experience. And none of those happen if you stay still. That's why growth is non-negotiable. Because the moment you stop growing, you start settling. Not always visibly, but internally. You begin to accept less than what you're capable of. You begin to lower your standards to match your current reality instead of elevating your reality to match your potential. And over time, that gap widens. The gap between who you are and who you could become. Growth closes that gap. It pushes you to learn when it would be easier to ignore. It pushes you to improve when it would be easier to repeat. It pushes you to evolve when it would be easier to stay the same. And evolution is where transformation happens. But transformation is not instant. It's built in small decisions, daily disciplines, consistent effort that often goes unnoticed. That's where expansion lives, not in dramatic moments, but in quiet commitment. You expand your mindset by challenging what you believe. You expand your skills by practicing beyond your comfort zone. You expand your identity by stepping into roles you've never held before. And with each step, something changes. You become more capable, more aware, more aligned with the person you're meant to be. But growth also requires honesty. You have to be willing to see where you're falling short, where you're making excuses, where you're choosing comfort over progress. Because without honesty, growth becomes illusion, and illusion keeps you stuck. So you confront it. You take responsibility, not for everything that's happened, but for everything you choose to do next. You recognize that while you can't control every outcome, you can control your effort, your mindset, and your willingness to keep moving forward. That's power. Not the power to control everything, but the power to keep growing regardless of circumstances. And when you adopt that mindset, something shifts. You stop fearing challenges, you stop avoiding discomfort, you stop waiting for the perfect moment. Because you understand that growth is the moment. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to expand. Every setback becomes a lesson to refine. Every experience becomes a step forward, even if it doesn't feel like it at the time. And over time, those steps compound. They build resilience. They build strength. They build a version of you that can handle more, achieve more, and become more. That's the outcome. Not perfection, but progress. Not arrival, but evolution. Because growth is not something you complete. It's something you commit to again and again. And once you make that commitment, there is no going back. Because staying the same is no longer an option. And becoming more becomes who you are.